Let's now start on removing this edge from our composite. So what we're going to do is we want to make a mask of this little edge, and then we're going to put the clean plate all the way on top of every layer that we have right now. And then once we have that, we will have a piece of the ground laying on top of our character. And then we will just mask out the separate pieces that move in front of this line from the character itself. So we'll have a little mask of the leg, of the left leg, the right leg, and the rest of the body. Now the biggest issue is actually when we're in this camera movement. So if we go all the way to the beginning, so I have my preview on the cropped version, so the final delivery format, and then let's see where exactly this comes in. So here is one of the first few frames where that edge is going to be visible, so we'll have to start masking from around frame 280 to 85, something like that. And so it starts at the top left of our image, and then during the camera movement, it moves through our frame until it settles somewhere here. So if you would mask just on top of this image, we would have to follow with our masks the movement of the camera and also the movement of the character. And we can actually use the tracking data that we have in a smart way to at least get rid of the camera movement in our image. So as you remember, we used this corner positioner to transform that frame, that clean plate, so that it matches the camera movement in our original plate. So for this, we're actually going to do the inverse. And so there's another tool called the perspective positioner. And you can see this exactly as the inverse of our corner positioner. So we have the tracking data from our original footage, and then we use that tracking data to from a certain frame and then transform that so that it fits that camera movement. With the corner positioner, we're gonna do exactly the opposite. We're going to actually stabilize our original footage so that it always fits in the frame that we chose as our reference frame. So let me show you. So we will connect the perspective positioner to the same tracking data. So I'm just going to connect it to path 1, position, and so on. And so once we have connected it, you see this is the result. So I feed in the original footage, and as I go through our camera movement, you see that it completely stabilizes the footage that we have. So that means that we can just, so once this character comes in front of the edge of this green screen, we can just play with our mask here. It means that we have to move our masks a lot less. We just have to adjust it to the movement of the character, but not to the movement of the camera, because we stabilize that with this perspective positioner. So once we have this original footage then stabilized with our tracking data, we could then, for example, we can just merge this on top of that. And so as you can see, we get an exact match, but it's just a different, like the inverse operation of that same thing. If you also go to our original tracker and go to the operation, you also see here that you have the same operation here. So just remember that these two are actually two sides of the same coin. So the corner positioning destabilizes the thing that you want to track into your footage, and the perspective positioning stabilizes your original footage. So that is the relationship between the two. So let's reorganize our flow a little bit. Okay, so I've made a new little section for the mask of the edge. So I start with my clean plate, so I bring the pipe down, and then I here also just multiply the alpha so that we get the same edge that we used before. And then I just use a brightness contrast tool active on the alpha channel and the gain to 0. And this is with a little mask that just masks out the edge where we want, where the character actually interacts with the edge of our clean plate. And this then gets, this is then inverted also. So then if we gain it, we just get only that edge. This is then of course done on our clean plate frame. So then we use another instance of that same corner positioner. So I Control C and then Control Shift V to make an instance copy of that. And this then destabilizes again the mask that we made, or patch of the edge, and then matches it to the camera movement. And this then gets merged on top of the result that we already have. So in that way we get rid already of that edge that we see, but we introduce, of course, again an issue that we have to solve. So that's then the next step, which will be to mask out these separate legs. Frame 292 is the first frame where I see we'll have to start masking the legs. So let's set up the mask for the legs. So we have our perspective positioner here, which stabilizes our original footage. So let's preview that on that same frame. And so here we see that, so we'll just start with making the mask for the left leg. So what I'm going to do is, again, with just a brightness contrast tool. And let's maybe, yeah, no, do it like that. Yeah. So let's get a brightness contrast tool and let's plug in our footage here. And on this brightness contrast tool, I'm going to get another mask, and we're going to create a polyline mask. Make sure that this is enabled so that we can draw in our viewport. This is the toggle for the controls in your viewport. And then let's just draw a mask here. So I'm just going to draw. I'm going to keep the mask as simple as possible. I think I'll just use 4 points. So that's the first keyframe for our left leg. And so let's also set up that we can check our mask. So let's do a check mask, matte check light maybe. Okay, so let's put that underneath here so we can always access it. And then we want to, of course, so this is the creation of the mask on the stabilized footage. So after we have done that, we have to then destabilize the mask. So let's just, in the brightness contrast tool, check the alpha and gain to 0. So we're just left, so then we're just left with the mask, but let's also just then in the brightness contrast tool apply the mask inverted. So we have our alpha here, and this is then again going to be destabilized with a copy of the corner positioner. So let's copy that. And Control Shift V for a duplicate, an instance. And this will then be this then goes into the main input. So then our mask is destabilized, so put in the right location for our leg here. Because we are actually stabilizing the footage first and then destabilizing, so we're doing two transform operations on our image. So what is maybe better to do is to just use this result of this destabilization as a mask to then put the original footage back on top, so without these two transform operations on them. So I will just get another copy of the original footage from there, and then just take a matte control, put this into the main inputs, and then in the matte control we're just going to despill the footage. So we don't have our green in there, and then we can just merge this on top of what we already have. So this will go into the main inputs. And then this result will go in the mask. So with this we control what part of this image, of this despilled image, will be then merged on top of our pipe here. And then this can go into the crop. So this is then the result right now, and so there is some motion blur added to this, and we don't really need that in this case. So I'm just going to go into this corner positioner, and I'm going to de-instance the motion blur settings, and then disable this. So as you can see, it will put motion blur on the other instances of the corner positioner, but by de-instancing this checkbox, we can have a different setting compared to the other instance copies of the corner positioner. And then it's just about refining the mask, so we can add a very tiny bit of soft edge on our mask. And then also just preview this in our second viewport. And then just make sure that the mask is aligned to where we need it. So let's also set up that we can compare our finished mask to the original footage. So let's just, or maybe just do this one. So in the B input, I can put in this result here, and then we can switch between the two. So I've added one extra point, just to have a little bit more control on where the edge is going to be, and then we get a rather good result. So to make this process a little bit quicker, we can also make sure that we're just previewing the parts of the image that we need to see. So in this viewport, for example, I'm going to put on the region of interest, and just let's maybe also make it a little bit smaller like that. So that we just focus on the part that we need to see. And also here, let's just put it a little bit smaller. What we can also do is just export an intermediate after this mask edge, so that all these calculations before don't have to be done. So that will speed up our workflow as well. But then we would need to get a saver here. And there's one thing that you have to keep in mind, is you cannot save out resolutions that are higher than ultra high D, which is 3840 on 2160. So it's a little bit too high. If I would like to render this out, the 4K version, you'll see that, and we need to, of course, also, if we want to go to PNG, we need a gamut. So the source space, no, the output space needs to be sRGB. And so then we can save this in our project folder in a new intermediate folder. And then I will just say floating object cache, and then we can render this out. And so as you can see, we get an error saying that we cannot output greater than ultra high D output. So what you can do to get rid of that is our mask is never going to be on the right part of the image. So what we can actually do is get a crop, and then just, if we set this first to this, so if we preview this, we get exactly the same. But if I now set this to 3860, 3840, I'm not sure anymore. Let's calculate it. 1920 times 2, 3840. So you'll see that if I disable this, you see that it's just the left part that gets cut off here. So this we can then render out to our intermediate cache. So if you have multiple savers in your project, be sure to disable that saver, so else you will also render this out, and so your render will take longer. So only the saver of our cache is active, and so we need to render out these frames, and let's render them out. So once this intermediate has been rendered out, we can load it back in again. And it's in the intermediate folder, and then there is our rendered out sequence. We rendered out from frame 292, the first frame from when we are going to start masking. And so let's put our global in also at that frame, of course. Now we rendered out to PNG, so we have to remove the gamut again from this. So let's take a gamut, source space, sRGB. And we also have to reformat our image to, again, a 4K format. So I set the X and Y size to 40962160. That can then go into our main input of this merge. And then, so on the left viewport, I have my masking, my mat check, to see how our created mask is put on this stabilized green screen footage, the original footage. And then on the left screen, we have that added. If we take this merge, we can look at the final result where our mask is destabilized, and then the despilled original footage is put on top of our composite that we rendered out here. So now it's just a question of going through the sequence and adjusting the mask so that we have a good mask all the way through. So on the right viewport, we have this region of interest that stays there. And on the left side, we can also reapply our region of interest to make our loading of the frames even faster. So then we can also disable our controls on the left viewports, because I don't want to see my mask on this one. And then we can also right click on the play button and put this to a more large frame number, for example 10. And then we will start on frame 300. And then we can see, okay, this was the first frame. Now the first few frames, the character is walking towards the beginning of the green screen. So we can just go and step through until he kind of stops there. So on frame 340 we can put another keyframe. So then our mask will already be animated along this path here, and then we can add keyframes in the middle of that sequence. So let's select everything, and then with Shift B we can take our shape box and then we can move it to where we need it to be and then scale it down. So these are now the finished masks. So as you can see, I have three polylines, one for the left leg, one for the right leg, and then one for the rest of the body. So these are all the keyframes for the mask of the left leg. And as you can see, so in the beginning there are really a lot of keyframes, that because he's still walking, so there's a lot of extra movement on the mask. And you can really see like, so every step that he takes, there are a lot of keyframes, but when he is just has put his foot down of this leg, or just standing still, then there are a lot less keyframes. So here at the end, he's not moving anymore, or just a little bit. So I really don't need a lot of keyframes anymore. So when creating this mask, the first pass that I do is just to get the big movements of the mask in there. So you begin at your first frame, you make a keyframe there for the shape or the part of the thing that you want to mask out. And then you just look at where he's making a big movement or where he's stopping a big movement. So for example, I would start here where he's putting his foot down, and then after this he's just standing there actually. So I would set the keyframe somewhere here, and then he's standing there a little bit, but then after a while he's again making another step. So you see that here he's again making a big step. So you would put another keyframe somewhere at the end of that step, so that we have that movement going like that. And then he's again standing still for a while, or he's still a little bit moving but not so much. And then after a while he's crouching down. So then you set the keyframe in the beginning of where he starts to crouch down, and then also somewhere at the end where he stops the movement. And then of course you can go all the way to the end, because in this part he's really not moving a lot. So then you can just go all the way to the end. And then like the big movements of the character are already set in the mask. So then it's always a matter of going to the half point between the keyframes that you've already set. So for example, in this first part, it's the beginning of the walk, and then somewhere at the end, like somewhere here, and then you just go somewhere in the middle. So you always have the sequence that is between the keyframes that you already have. And then after that, so you can start to see that you'll get like every 10 frames a keyframe, and then after that you can have those again to every 5 keyframes. And so in these parts you see that that kind of level of detail is enough for the movement that is there. But then for the parts where he's really like moving a lot, like moving his leg to make a step, you will have to go really like frame by frame. But because you have already put those big movements in, and then also already put some keyframes in the middle of each sequence, then you won't have that much of a change anymore in your mask, but you will just have to go through it and just make little changes to adapt the mask exactly to what you need for that frame. But the usage of this corner perspective positioner and then again destabilizing with the corner positioner really makes a lot of difference. If you wouldn't have applied this, then there would be a lot more keyframes in the sequence, which means it would take a lot more time to create the mask. So this is a technique that can save you a lot of time and work, but of course you'll still have to create some masking, and there is no real magic button for that. You just have to take your time and some patience and just go through it. So at the beginning of the masking, you'll see that we also have a keyframe on the level. So it's set to 0 all the way in the beginning of our sequence, and then from the frame that I need it, I set it to 1 so that it becomes active or visible. So I do that also on the other mask leg. It's exactly the same. And then on the mask for the rest of the body, so in the beginning of the sequence we don't need it, so it's also just set to 0, and then it's somewhere in this area where it becomes active. Now, as you can see, the paint mode is also set to maximum here, and that is because so once it is the level is set to 0, yeah, I don't want to keyframe it anymore. I just leave it where it is. But as you can see here now, it's covering the other mask, and if it's just put on merge, the default paint mode, you'll see that it cuts into this mask. So that's not what we want. So that's why I set this paint mode to maximum. So then it just takes whichever value there is from this mask or that mask. So it will always remain 1 if one of the masks is on that area. Okay, so that's it for this video, and see you in the next one.